We often picture the Jedi Order as beacons of light, wisdom, and unwavering moral fortitude. But what if their own principles, twisted by fear, led them to commit an unforgivable act? Centuries after the Great Sith War, the galaxy bore deep scars. The Jedi, once invincible, were left shaken, scarred by betrayal and immeasurable loss. Many of their greatest seers had failed to foresee the Sith's rise, leading to countless deaths. This failure bred a new, insidious kind of fear within the Order. From this fear, a shadow faction emerged, the Covenant. A secret circle of Jedi convinced that they alone could safeguard the galaxy from the Sith's inevitable return. At its heart was Kinda Dre, a woman haunted by personal tragedy. Her husband, Barrisone Dre, fell battling the Sith, leaving her consumed by grief and a chilling paranoia. Barrisone's death, to Kinda, symbolized the Jedi Council's utter failure. Their vaunted seers, blinded, had missed the rising darkness, leaving her alone with her infant son, Lucian. She lost faith in the Council, but not in the Force. In her solitude, she envisioned a radical solution, a secret watch unburdened by politics, dedicated solely to prophecy. Kinda gathered gifted seers, Cornelia, who saw with the Force, Zamar with intense visions, Ranate with fierce instincts, and Fior and Fel with primal foresight. Their mission was absolute: to peer into the Force, discern signs of the Sith's return, and act before tragedy struck again. But their vow held a dangerous flaw. Where the Council sought patience and balance, Kinda demanded urgency and certainty. Their loyalty wasn't to the Order, but to her vision, a vision born from unrelenting fear. And then there was Lucian Dre, Kinda's only son. In another life, he could have been a bridge between grief and hope. But Kinda, chained to the Covenant, saw only Barrisone's ghost in him. Instead, Lucian's training fell to Hazen, a bitter, crippled ex-acolyte. Hazen, a failed Jedi, dreamed of power, worming his way into Kinda's confidence after her husband's death. Hazen became Kinda's dark confidant, subtly twisting her grief into paranoia. He nurtured Lucian's resentment, grooming him not for love, but for a twisted sense of duty. Kinda bestowed upon Lucian a chilling title, the Executive. He wouldn't share visions, but enforce their will. He would be the sword of prophecy, wielded without question. Thus, the Covenant solidified a secret cult within the Jedi, believing they alone carried the burden of safeguarding the galaxy. They looked not to the light, but to the shadows. Years passed. The Covenant's gaze turned ever outward, their obsession consuming them. Every ripple in the Force, every shadow in a vision, was dissected and feared. In 3969 BBY, the Covenant's Watch Circle was stationed at the Jedi Tower on Terrace, a satellite academy for Padawans, far from Coruscant's bustle. Here, 5 young Padawans were placed under their care. Zane Carrick, clumsy but well-meaning. Shad Gellivan, with a fiery heart. Camelin, cunning. Garn, brooding, and Ujo, gentle. Each was paired with a Jedi Master. Most crucially, Lucian Dre was reluctantly paired with Zane Carrick, the clumsy human whose training was marked by constant failures. The time came for their final trial. The Covenant sent them to the Rogue Moon, a jagged planetoid constantly battered by meteors, its surface a storm of fire and stone. The Padawans, clad in red environment suits, were blind to everything but the Force. They had to cross the moon, relying on trust and intuition, to reach their masters. But for the masters, the trial was never about their students. While the Padawans braved the firestorm, the Covenant meditated, seeking clarity, believing chaos would thin the veil. What they saw shook them. Visions of slaughter. Each master saw their violent death, struck down by a figure in red, not Sith robes, but the simple environment suits their Padawans wore. One saw ruins, another flames consuming the Order, another the Republic collapsing, but one thread united them: death at the hands of their own Padawans. Fear spread like wildfire. The Covenant didn't question the vision's veracity. They didn't seek interpretation, balance, or the Council's guidance. The future was a blade descending. The Sith would return, they believed, through one of the very children now walking blindly towards them. The debate among them was immediate and fierce. Ronai and Fel argued for immediate execution. Cornelia hesitated, whispering that prophecy wasn't always literal. Zamar refused outright, demanding the council be consulted. The Covenant had sworn secrecy, yes, but could they truly justify killing their own students without proof? A silent, unseen puppet master watched their fear intensify. Restraint came not from wisdom, but from Kinda Dre herself. Contacted through Hazen, she forbade execution. She demanded the Padawans be brought to her alive for further study. But Lucian, the executive, son, and enforcer, was tired of his mother's commands. To him, the visions were undeniable. Hesitation was a risk too great to bear, and so, with a single, chilling lie, he sealed their fate. Lucian told his fellow masters that the order was given, permission granted. The decision was made. From that moment, 5 Padawans became more than students. They were potential Sith, future killers, prophecies in flesh. The Covenant convinced themselves to strike first. The Jedi, sworn guardians, transformed into executioners. On that fateful day, their fear twisted duty into a horrifying act of preemptive violence, shattering their sacred vows. Days following the Rogue Moon trial were strange. Exhausted, yet hopeful, the Padawans whispered in the Jedi Tower, believing their masters debated their knighthood. But behind closed doors, no merits were discussed, no futures planned. The Covenant crafted a story, a chilling lie, to mask the impending truth. Lucian reinforced his lie. The order was clear. The Padawans were destined to bring the Sith's return. They must die before prophecy unfolded. The Covenant agreed. Under the guise of celebration, a banquet was arranged. The grand hall, adorned with banners, tables piled with food, flickering candles, a dream for the Padawans. But for the Masters, it was an execution chamber. Their smiles were forced, their eyes betraying the horrific purpose behind the festive facade. Inside, the Padawans waited for Zane, late as usual. Shad Gellivan, restless, noticed something strange. Lucian Dre carrying Zane's lightsaber. Why would Lucian carry his student's weapon? The implication struck Shad like a physical blow. Had Zane, the clumsy fool, been chosen for knighthood before them all? The other Padawans followed Shad's gaze. They saw their master's hands tighten, unease reflected in their own faces. For the first time, they doubted. The masters knew their secret was slipping. The children were seeing cracks in the story. In a flash, they ignited their lightsabers, shattering the false peace. What followed was no duel, no honorable contest. It was slaughter. The Covenant struck with merciless precision. Shad, about to question, was cut down. Camelin fell moments later, disbelief in her eyes. Garn, disciplined, activated his saber, only to be overwhelmed by Zamar. Gentle Ujo barely raised his hands before Fell's blade struck. They died without answers, without understanding, betrayed by the very people who had raised them, who had sworn to protect them, who were supposed to be family. Then the doors opened. Zane, winded from the chase, entered, a grin, ready to apologize for his lateness. His smile died instantly. His friends sprawled lifeless on the floor. The master stood over them, the killers. Zane stared, disbelief warring with horror. He looked to Lucian, his guide, to Cornelia, who had smiled gently, to Ronate, who barked harsh orders. They were not Sith, they were Jedi Masters, and they had murdered his friends. Lucian stepped forward, his voice cold, commanding Zane to surrender. But Zane's body moved before thought. He turned and ran, fleeing the nightmare. Behind him, the Masters shouted, their voices echoing. Ahead, the city sprawled, unaware of the massacre staining its sacred halls. The Covenant's plans shifted instantly. They would not admit their heinous act. Instead, they would craft a web of lies burying the truth beneath propaganda. Shad, headstrong, had snapped, murdering his classmates. The Masters, forced to intervene, cut him down. Zane, the failure, was framed as Shad's accomplice, the Padawan Butcher. The Jedi Covenant's betrayal was buried. To the galaxy, the Terrace Four were victims of one Padawan's madness. To the Order, the Covenant remained watchful protectors. But to Zane and to history, the truth was unmistakable. The Jedi killed their own. It wasn't an accident of war, nor Sith corruption. It was a cold, deliberate massacre. A slaughter of children who trusted their masters. Guardians sworn to protect, They betrayed that sacred duty in the worst way imaginable, shattering innocence. The chilling aspect wasn't merely the spilled blood, but the reason behind it. The Covenant weren't Sith Lords consumed by power. They were Jedi, genuinely believing they saved the galaxy. They acted not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of the Sith, fear of their visions, and fear of another catastrophic failure, a deeply ironic twist of their own teachings. Jedi were taught to master fear, to rise above it. Yet, these masters became enslaved to it. They saw a shadow, giving it more weight than the living, breathing children they swore to protect. Consider Kinda Dre. Her grief for Barrisone, her refusal to let go of that pain, became obsession. Determined to prevent further suffering, she inadvertently planted seeds for a darker tragedy. The Master-Padawan bond was as close as family. To turn on that bond, to raise a blade against one's own student, it is one of the darkest betrayals imaginable, casting a long shadow on Jedi philosophy. But the Covenant, believing their visions compelled them, were not acting alone. Behind their blades stood another figure who never swung a lightsaber that night, yet was far more responsible. His name, Hazen, a failed Padawan, crippled and scarred, who never earned a saber or a council seat. A man consumed by bitterness, who wormed his way into a powerful Jedi family. It was Hazen who became Kinda Dre's confidant, whispering insidious suggestions after Barrisone's death. It was Hazen who, in Kinda's neglect, raised Lucian into the Covenant's cold executive. And it was Hazen who took the Covenant's visions of doom and twisted them into justification for murder. He was the architect of their despair, the maestro of their fear. The Covenant thought they saved the galaxy. In truth, they acted on the philosophy of a man who believed both Jedi and Sith were incomplete. Hazen saw himself as the missing piece. He sought to merge Jedi foresight with Sith ruthlessness, turning prophecy into a weapon, fear into a creed. His vision was a corrupt synthesis of galactic power. Hazen was never a Sith Lord, nor bore the Darth title, yet in many ways he was more dangerous. Unlike the Sith who sought to destroy from without, Hazen corrupted from within. He manipulated their fear, guided their hands, leaving the Jedi Order with blood on its conscience that it never truly atoned for, planting seeds of its future downfall. The Padawan massacre of Terrace. Is this truly the worst thing the Jedi ever did? Was there any justification for such a horrific act? The answers linger, dark and unsettling. If you're fascinated by the shadows within the Jedi and want a deeper dive into Hazen's twisted genius, let us know. Your destiny and his story await. Thank you for joining us in dissecting this dark chapter. May the Force guide you, and may you never forget the lessons learned from the blurred lines of light and dark. The Jedi archives hold countless tales of heroism, but also whispers of profound failures. Today, we uncover one of the most chilling a betrayal from within. The Great Sith War didn't just decimate planets, it shattered the Jedi's faith in their own foresight. How could the Sith rise unnoticed? Kinda Dre's personal loss mirrored the Order's collective despair. Barrisone, her warrior husband, died senselessly. His sacrifice, a testament to the Council's blindness. She saw incompetence where there should have been vigilance. The Council, so revered, had failed to see Exar Kun or Ula Keldroma's fall. The Jedi were blind. Her heart hardened. She severed ties with the traditional order, convinced they couldn't be trusted with the future. But her gifts in the Force, she never abandoned. In the silence of her grief, she imagined a different path. A clandestine circle of Jedi who would never again allow the Sith to rise. A secret watch, a covenant. Her sole mission, gather the most gifted seers, war orphans, trained not for battle, but for prophecy. Each a living beacon against the encroaching darkness. Emilia, a Miraluka girl who saw through the Force. Zamar, whose keel visions burned with detail. Rana Te, a Togruta with unshakable instincts. Fior and Fel with primal foresight. They formed the first Watch Circle, bound by oath and secrecy. Their task was simple, yet terrifying. Peer into the Force, discern the Sith's return, and act decisively. But even from its inception, their vow was brittle. Kinda demanded urgency, not patience. Certainty, not balance. Their loyalty was to her vision, tainted by her pain. Lucian Dre, Kinda's son, could have been her legacy of hope. Instead, haunted by visions, Kinda was chained to the Covenant, barely looking at him, seeing only Barrisone. His training she entrusted to Hazen, a bitter, half-crippled, failed Jedi acolyte. Hazen denied a future, nurtured Lucian's pride and resentment, shaping him into a weapon. To Kinda, Lucian was not a child to be loved, but a role to be filled. The executive. He would not sit with seers. His task was colder, enforce their will, be the sword of prophecy. The Covenant was born, a cult of visionaries and enforcers, believing they alone could safeguard the galaxy. They saw only the Sith in the shadows of past and future. At the Jedi Tower on Terrace, far from Coruscant's hustle, 5 young Padawans trained, unaware of the insidious force watching their every move. Zane Carrick, the clumsy human whose training was marked by constant failure, was reluctantly paired with Lucian Dre, a stark contrast between innocence and grim purpose. Their final trial, the Rogue Moon, a planetoid battered by meteors, a storm of fire and stone, a test of trust, intuition, and above all, survival. But for the Masters, the trial was merely a backdrop. They sought to pierce the veil, believing the chaos of the moon would amplify their visions, reveal the ultimate truth. What they saw shattered their resolve. Visions of slaughter. Each Master dying violently, struck down by a figure in red. The simple environment suits their Padawan's war. Details differed, but the core was chilling. Death at the hands of one of their own Padawans. The Sith would return, they concluded, through these very children. Fear spread like wildfire. They questioned nothing. The future, a blade descending. Ronite and Fel argued for immediate execution. Cornelia hesitated. Zamar refused outright. They swore secrecy. But could they justify killing their students without solid proof? A silent puppet master watched, subtly pulling the strings, nurturing their panic. Kinda Dre through Hazen forbade the execution. She demanded the Padawans brought to her alive. She wanted to study them, to search their futures more carefully. But Lucian, the executive, son, enforcer, had grown tired of his mother's commands. To him, the visions were undeniable. Hesitation risked everything, perhaps even the entire order. With a single, chilling lie, he sealed their fate. Lucian told his fellow masters the order was given, permission granted. The decision was irreversible. They were no longer students. They were potential Sith, future killers, prophecies in flesh. The Covenant convinced themselves the only way to save the galaxy was to strike first. Jedi, meant to be guardians, became executioners. On that day, fear, amplified by manipulation, shattered their sacred duty, turning protectors into predators. The days after the Rogue Moon trial were strange. Exhausted, yet hopeful, the Padawans whispered, eagerly awaiting their promotion to knighthood, their dreams almost within grasp. Behind closed doors, no joyous debates transpired. The Covenant, led by Lucian's cold conviction, crafted a chilling lie, a story to mask their heinous truth. A banquet was arranged, a grand celebration. The hall, lit with banners, tables laden with food, candles flickering. To the Padawans, a dream. To the Masters, a death chamber. Inside the banquet chamber, the Padawans waited for Zane. Shad Gellivan, restless, noticed Lucian Dre's lightsaber hanging at his side. But it was Zane's. The implication struck him like a blow. Why would Lucian carry his student's weapon? Had Zane, the clumsy one, been chosen for knighthood before them all? The others followed Shad's gaze. They saw their master's hands tighten, their unease now reflected in their own faces. For the first time, doubt turned to dread. The masters knew. Their secret was exposed. The children were no longer blind. In a flash of cold decision, the masters ignited their lightsabers, shattering all pretense. What followed was no duel, no training exercise. It was slaughter. The Covenant struck with merciless speed. Shad, about to question, was cut down before he could cry out. Camelin fell moments later, disbelief lingering. Garn, disciplined, activated his saber, only to be overwhelmed by Zamar. Gentle Ujo barely raised his hands before Fel's blade cut him down. They died without answers, without understanding, betrayed by the very people who had raised them, who had sworn to protect them. Their trusting young lives extinguished. And then the doors opened. Zane, winded from running, entered the hall with a grin, ready to apologize for his lateness. He saw his friends, sprawled, lifeless. The master stood over them, silent, their sabers now deactivated. They were the killers. Zane looked to Lucian, his guide, his mentor, his betrayer. He looked at Cornelia, Ronate, Felm, Zamar. They were not Sith, they were Jedi. Jedi Masters. And they had just murdered all of his friends. Lucian stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding, telling Zane to surrender. But Zane's body moved before any thought could form. He turned and he ran. Behind him, the Masters shouted, their voices echoing off the walls. Ahead of Zane, the city sprawled, utterly unaware of the massacre that had just transpired. The Covenant's plan shifted instantly. They would not admit to killing their students. Instead, they would spread a story, a vile lie to preserve their fragile existence. Shad, rejected for his headstrong nature, had snapped, murdering his classmates before the Masters were forced to cut him down. Zane, the failure, was framed as Shad's accomplice. And so, the Jedi Covenant's betrayal was buried beneath lies and propaganda. To the galaxy, the Terrace Four were victims of one Padawan's madness. To the Order, the Covenant remained watchful protectors. But to Zane, and to history, the truth is unmistakable. The Jedi killed their own, not by accident, but by choice. This was a massacre. A cold, deliberate slaughter of children who trusted their lives to Jedi Masters. Masters who betrayed that duty in the worst way possible. What makes the Padawan massacre chilling is not just the blood spilled, but why times it was spilled. The Covenant were not Sith Lords. They were Jedi, believing they saved the galaxy. They acted not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of the Sith, fear of their visions, and fear of another failure, a fear that consumed them whole. Twisting their purpose, the Jedi were supposed to teach their Padawans how to master fear, to rise above it. Instead, these masters became slaves to it. Their own teachings turned against them. They saw a shadow of the future and gave it more weight than the living, breathing children who had trusted them completely, who had looked up to them for guidance. Consider Kindadre, whose grief for Barrisone drove her to form the Covenant. Her attachment, her refusal to let go of that pain, became obsession. She became determined. In her zeal to prevent suffering, she planted the seeds of an even darker tragedy. The Padawan massacre, a direct consequence of unchecked attachment and fear. The Master-Padawan bond, as close as family, was desecrated. To turn on that bond, to raise a blade against one's own student, it is the darkest betrayal imaginable. The Jedi Covenant believed they acted alone that night on Terrace. They thought their visions, their paranoia sealed their fate. But behind their blades, another figure stood. His name was Hazen, a failed Padawan, crippled and scarred in the war. A man who never earned a lightsaber, never earned a seat on any council. Yet, he wormed his way into the heart of one of the Republic's most powerful Jedi families. He became Kindadre's confidant, poisoning her grief. He raised her son Lucian in her neglect, shaping him into the Covenant's cold executive. And he took the Covenant's visions of doom, turning them into justification for murder. The Jedi Covenant thought they were saving the galaxy by killing children. In truth, they were acting on Hazen's twisted philosophy, that Jedi and Sith were both incomplete. Hazen saw himself as the missing piece, the one who could merge Jedi foresight with Sith ruthlessness, turning prophecy into a weapon and fear into a creed. He was never a Sith Lord, he never wore the Darth title. But in many ways, Hazen was more dangerous. He destroyed the Jedi from within, manipulating their fear, guiding their hands, leaving their order with blood on its conscience that it never truly atoned for, a scar that would never fully heal. The Padawan massacre of Terrace. Is this the worst thing the Jedi have ever done? And is there any part of you that thinks they were justified? If you're interested in the architect of this tragedy, Hazen, and wish to unravel his full story, let us know. A true master of manipulation deserves his own holocron. As always, thank you for visiting the archives today. May the Force be with you, and may you learn from the shadows of history.